I've decided to compile some comments and references that, for the sake of this series, I'll be referring to as the Reddit collection. My name's Cyael, and I should probably distance myself from this material, informing people that I'm not responsible for any of the things I'm gonna cover, but honestly, if you think I'm capable of all of the things I'm about to spew, then I admire you. Without further ado, let's proceed, in no particular order. Number 5. Colby. Listeners, it's important you understand that the series of posts we Redditors affectionately refer to as Colby are part of a saga, and for the sake of this video, I'm only going to be reading the first and last post by user ConcernedDad1965. His first post is entitled, "I think my teenage son may have sodomized our dog. I'm not sure what to do. Help me, Reddit." Okay. For obvious reasons, this is a throwaway account, so I'm not even sure how to start here. The last couple of weeks, my dog, 7-year-old Lab, has been acting noticeably different. I guess I could describe it as distant and even depressed. He's normally an extremely outgoing and happy dog, very playful and energetic, etc. But starting about 2 weeks ago, he started acting very withdrawn and nervous around people, even his own family. At first I kind of brushed it off as feeling under the weather, but after about a week and a half, I decided maybe he needed to see a vet. I got him in yesterday, and after an examination, the vet told me he believes that the dog has been sodomized. His anus had slight damage in a way that was consistent with that sort of thing. He said he can't really imagine that his injuries could have come about any other way. So already now, I'm pretty upset and sort of freaking out. Who would do this sort of thing to a dog? I thought about all of the people who had access to the dog and my backyard. Gardeners crossed my mind, neighbors, etc. The only people that live in the house are my wife, myself, and our teenage son. I came home and thought about it for a while. I had this really ugly sinking feeling in my stomach about the possibility that it could have been my son. I decided to look around his room. I didn't really know what I was expecting to find, and I didn't really find anything in there that screamed guilty until I decided to check his browser history. I found that he had been on a bestiality forum recently, and a site with pictures of that sort of thing. I felt like I was going to throw up. Now, I know this isn't definitive proof of anything, but it sure doesn't look good. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced my son has been sodomizing our dog. I haven't told my wife yet or done anything about it. I have not left him alone with the dog since. I am totally confused and upset and don't really know how to proceed with this. Reddit, please help. Edit. Thank you for all your advice. To those of you who are serious, I understand this seems like a joke to some of you, but it's not to me. So for those of you who have real advice, thank you. I think I'm going to take your advice and confront him about it privately, without involving my wife. It is not going to be an easy conversation, but it has to happen. My only worry is the possibility that he isn't guilty of this, and somebody else did it. I guess then we still need to talk about what I found on his computer. Ugh, fuck my life. Thank you for being there for me, Reddit.
Thank you for being a friend.
Okay, just spoke to my son. Before I get into our talk, let me quickly say thank you all again for your incredible advice and support. There were a lot of really helpful suggestions in there, and I took some. Okay, look, I waited for my wife to go to bed, which felt like forever because I was so nervous. But she finally did about an hour ago, and I went into my son's room to have the talk. I basically said, listen, I noticed the dog has been acting weird. I took him to the vet and found someone has sodomized him. Any ideas what might have happened? I looked at my son, and he seemed ever so slightly nervous, but pretended to know nothing about it. I expected this, so I brought up the sites I found on his computer. Naturally, this made him pretty upset, and he got really indignant at the thought that I snooped around on his computer. Fair enough, I get it. But I got him back to the point and tried to be as understanding and fatherly as I could, and just told him that whatever happened, I am not going to judge him, and he's not going to be punished. I just need to know the truth. After about 10 to 15 minutes of this, he finally breaks down and admits that he put the handle of a hairbrush as well as his fingers into the dog a few times during a day last week. He said he wasn't trying to hurt him, and he stopped when the dog at one point freaked out. He said he didn't think he hurt it that bad, and he was too embarrassed to tell us or do anything about it. I believed him in this, but he also didn't give a very satisfactory answer as to why he would do this in the first place. I have to admit, either way, I was glad on some level to hear that he wasn't actually having sex with the dog. So basically, we agreed that we wouldn't tell his mom, but we would find a reason to tell her that he needs to see a therapist for a bit. I know I told him I wouldn't tell his mother, but the more I think about all of this, the more I think I may eventually have to go back on that promise. As for now, the dog is staying with family, and obviously I made him swear up and down that he will not touch the dog like that again, under threat of severe consequences. It's too early to tell if he feels remorse or if he's just humiliated. It's hard to say. It was very uncomfortable for both of us, but especially my son. I'm sure we can all imagine. Listeners, that's pretty much the gist of the first post. Fucking text messages. The links will be in the description. On to the fourth and final post. Entitled, I am the father/redditor who lost his family after it came to light that my son was sexually abusing our dog, Colby. I have some good news for everyone. Colby is safe, but there's still a question of what to do with my son. Well, I guess let's start at the beginning. I know most of you might not know my story, so here's my original 3 posts detailing what happened with my family over the last several months. First post, where I found out my son had sexually abused my dog with a hairbrush and wanted advice on how to deal with it. Second post, where I find out my son has gone back on his word and the dog has been abused again. Third post, where after all of this drama over our son and shaky marriage, my wife and I separate and I lose my son and dog. To put a long story short, I discovered my teenage son had sexually abused our family dog Colby with a hairbrush and his fingers a few months ago. After I confronted him about it, he confessed and promised never to do it again, and in return I agreed to keep it between him and I and not tell his mom. A while later I discover my son reneged on his promise to me and has abused the dog again. This time I felt I had to bring my wife into the matter, and when I told her, it all blew up in my face. She couldn't believe her son would do that sort of thing, and she eventually got it in her head, somehow, that it must have been me that abused the dog. A short while after telling her about these incidents, we separated, and she wound up with the dog and my son, who, when confronted, went back and denied that he had ever done anything to the dog, despite admitting to me that he had, and me actually catching him in the act a different time. So, the last time I updated, I had been living at a friend's house while my wife and son and Colby stayed at the family house. My wife was somehow convinced that I was the abuser of our dog and that I was blaming it on my son, which is maybe the most confusing and infuriating feeling I have ever had. I tried calling my son for several days in hope that I could convince him to come clean and help get us on the road to fixing our family. He did not pick up, nor did he ever call me back. So about 2 weeks ago, I decided to show up at the house when I knew they would all be there. I knocked on the door and my wife would not answer it. I admit, I kinda lost it and started shouting and pounding on it, and she eventually came outside, where a yelling match ensued between her and I in the front yard. I finally left after she put her hands over her ears and started yelling dog fucker, dog fucker, dog fucker over and over again to try and humiliate me in front of the neighborhood. As I walked back to my car fuming, I looked back at the house and saw my son staring at me from the second-story window with a blank look on his face. I stared at him and shook my head in disappointment, but he didn't change his expression. I have to admit, that really broke my heart and pissed me off. So, fast forward to a couple of days ago. I'm at work nearing the end of my day when suddenly my phone rings and it's my wife. I pick it up and she's sobbing and obviously very upset. She tells me that Colby has bitten my son and he has gone to the hospital to get stitches. She says Colby bit him in the lower abdomen 2 times. She doesn't know what to think. I'll tell you what to think, bitch. Obviously, I know exactly what happened. I could tell she finally knew I was right. Colby would never bite anyone unprovoked. He's an incredibly friendly dog and has no history of biting or being aggressive at all. When we got off the phone, I felt this rage building inside me. I felt like it was finally time for this shit to end. Colby had stood up for himself against my son, who had betrayed both of us. I couldn't prove it, but I just know my son was abusing the dog again, and I felt responsible for having left him alone with Colby all of these times. It was like Colby finally lashed out in desperation after having nobody there to protect him. I felt sick to my stomach for having abandoned my dog with my kid, who obviously doesn't give a fuck about me or any of us, as long as he can keep getting away with shit. I left work and went straight to the family home. This time, my wife answered the door and let me in. I went straight to my son's room where he was laying down watching TV. He looked at me in surprise and I told him not to talk. I basically said, I know what you did. You can deny it and you can blame me all you want, but you and I both know what happened. I'm taking the dog, and if I ever find out you go near an animal like this again, I will report you to the police. I don't care if you are my son. This is disgusting and unfair, and I raised you better. Obviously, I said more than that, but that was the gist of it. He was extremely uncomfortable, and I went downstairs and out the back door to get the dog. I put a leash on Colby and walked him back through the house, and my wife stopped me and told me she was sorry. We talked for about 5 minutes, and we both got a little weepy. She asked me to forgive her, which I told her I did. She then invited me to stay at the house, to which I said no. I'm not ready for that, and Colby deserves better. I had already let him down too many times. I left her crying in the house and put Colby in the car. We drove back to my friend's place where I'm staying. I've since been looking for a small apartment with a short-term lease that accepts dogs, as I've decided that I'm not going to move back in with my family, at least not in the immediate future. Colby is finally with me and is safe, and I need time to think about what our next move should be. Cyael here. Thanks for listening. Did you like this one? At least it had a happy ending. Leave a comment about it. Or kick me. I don't care.